My wife yelled, "Stop being so emotional about my work trip. I'm not your property." I just said, "Noted." The next morning, she walked into the company I built to find her father and her lover, staring, white-faced, at the man sitting in my chair. She did not kiss me goodbye. That detail sounds small when I say it out loud, but after 11 years of marriage, you develop a grammar of affection, a private language made of small gestures that most couples do not even notice until it disappears. A hand on the shoulder blade, a forehead press, a "see you soon" that carries actual weight. None of that happened the morning she left. She wheeled her designer suitcase across the foyer tile, the hard plastic wheels clicking against the grout lines with a sound that felt almost aggressive, phone already pressed to her ear, sunglasses already pushed up onto her face despite the fact that she was still standing indoors. She had been on that call since she came downstairs. She did not end it when she reached the door. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a coffee mug I had poured for both of us, and I watched her reach for the handle of the front door, and I asked her a simple question. I asked whether 4 days of client meetings was really necessary this time of year, with the Q3 review cycle already stressing the operations team and the Hartwell contract still waiting for her sign-off on the communications deliverables. That was when she paused. Not to consider the question. Not to give me a real answer. She paused the way a performer pauses before a rehearsed line, and she turned around wearing that smirk, that specific, theatrical, entirely constructed smirk she deploys when she has decided she is already winning an argument that has not even started yet. She said something about not being my property. She said I needed to stop being so emotional about a work trip. She said it the way people say things they have been practicing. Then she turned back to the door and walked out. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not follow her to the driveway. I stood in that kitchen, set the second mug of coffee on the counter, and said one word to the closed door, "Noted." Then I walked directly to my study, closed the door behind me, moved to the bookshelf along the far wall, reached behind a row of untouched business strategy books that she had never once opened, and pulled out a leather-bound folder with silver foil lettering on the cover. The label read, "Contingency." I want you to understand what that folder represented before I tell you what was inside it. I had built that company across 12 years of my life, 12 years of 7-day weeks that blurred into each other, 12 years of supplier renegotiations at midnight, of personally guaranteeing lines of credit that would have destroyed most men if the margins had slipped even slightly, of flying to secondary markets that no one else wanted to bother with and shaking hands with people who had no reason to trust me yet and somehow convincing them that they should. At our peak, the firm was valued at north of $42 million. She had come into the business in year 4, taking the title of Director of Communications and Culture. She hosted team events. She wrote the quarterly newsletters. She handled the public-facing relationship side of things, and she did those parts reasonably well. But the architecture of the company, the equity structure, the vendor agreements, the banking relationships, the compliance protocols, every load-bearing wall of that organization, that was mine. She had a title. I had the foundation, and I had known for approximately 9 weeks that something was structurally wrong. The contingency folder had been sitting behind those books for 6 of those 9 weeks. I had hoped I would never need to open it. When I heard her suitcase wheels disappear down the driveway, I understood that hope was finished. Within 3 hours of her departure, I had placed calls to 3 individuals whose professional discretion I trusted completely, and whose silence, I will be honest, costs considerably more than her entire quarterly marketing budget. Non-disclosure agreements were signed by all 3 before noon. I opened the contingency folder and turned to the first tabbed section. It was labeled Phase 1, Containment. My signature was already on the authorization line. It had been waiting there for weeks. It only needed activation. I picked up my pen and dated it. Her flight landed at 6:32 that evening. She had told me she was attending a series of client meetings at a regional office located approximately 4 hours north of our city. Her location, pulled from a service I had quietly established through our joint family account, with the full blessing of our prenuptial technology clause, pinged from a boutique hotel. The hotel was 2 hours south of the client office she had described. The street it sat on was familiar to me. We had stayed there together once, years ago, before a winery tour, back when things between us were what I had believed they were. Our joint credit card flagged a dinner transaction at 8:46 that evening. 2 entrees, champagne, a room service charge logged at 11:14 at night. Then came the notification that produced the first genuine smile I had allowed myself in weeks. An attempted login to our family investment portal had failed. She had tried to access the account. She had found the password changed. She had probably spent the next several minutes telling herself I was just being petty, that I had made some minor reactive move out of wounded feelings. She had always assumed I moved more slowly than I actually do. By midnight, our legal counsel had received the limited power of attorney transfer instructions. No questions were asked. The documents were filed, executed, and confirmed before 2 in the morning. I slept better than I had in months. The following morning, I learned everything I needed to know about who she had spent those hours with. Not just his name, his entire professional profile, his reporting structure, his history. He was a mid-level operations manager inside my own company. He worked 2 floors below my office. I had met him personally at a team leadership event approximately 2 years earlier. I remembered shaking his hand. I remembered telling him to stay ambitious because I could see potential in the way he spoke about process optimization. He had smiled like a man who understood the advice. He had apparently taken it in a direction I had not intended. He had been fast-tracked into the firm 7 weeks after her father joined us for a golf weekend in a coastal region that matched, down to the specific hotel chain, the time-stamped location metadata from the first photo of the 2 of them together that my investigative resource had surfaced. Her father, a man I had welcomed into our advisory board 4 years ago. A man who had shaped hiring decisions, shaped partnership evaluations, shaped which individuals received access to which internal rooms for years, and who I had trusted because he was family, and because I was building something I believed we were all building together. This was not infidelity dressed up as circumstance. This was coordinated. This was a structure built inside the structure I had created. And when I understood that, something finished inside me that I did not mourn. I was not heartbroken in the way people expect. I was not angry the way people expect. I was completely, precisely, almost serenely calculating. Because once a betrayal goes corporate, it stops being personal in the way that demands grief. It becomes chess, and I have always been significantly better at chess than anyone in that family ever knew. I pulled a secure compliance report filed by a former ethics officer at the firm. It had been submitted 18 months earlier, flagging the same operations manager for excessive and inappropriate proximity to a previous supervisor during a vendor selection process. The report had been routed to HR and quietly, conclusively dismissed. The dismissal recommendation had come from her father. I reopened the case. I had our compliance infrastructure treated as a live active matter. I placed a call to my private general counsel, the attorney who has represented my personal interests for 9 years and whose name has never appeared on any organizational chart connected to the company. I said we have a breach. He did not ask me what category of breach. He has known me long enough to understand that when I use that word, I have already defined it completely. He asked one question. He said, "Do you want isolation or exposure?" I thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. I said both. We scheduled a formal board meeting for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. A draft memo had already been prepared by my communications director and was formatted for distribution to the full shareholder list, 400 recipients, scheduled send set for Monday morning, 3 days before her planned return date. Within 30 minutes of that email landing in inboxes, 92% of recipients had opened it. The board members had already made their positions clear before she had even checked out of that boutique hotel. She was not a factor in those conversations. She was not even an afterthought. She was a footnote that had already been redacted. She arrived home Wednesday evening, dragging that suitcase across the same foyer tile, and I noticed that she had bought something new. New shoes, expensive ones, the kind she buys when she is in a good mood. She moved through the house like a woman who believed she had gotten away with something. She made herself a glass of wine. She scrolled through her phone at the kitchen island. She said very little to me. I said very little in return. There was no confrontation. There was no scene. I had been asked by several people who knew pieces of this situation whether I intended to say anything to her that night. whether I needed that moment of looking her in the eyes and naming what she had done. I did not. Everything I needed to say was already sitting at the center of a boardroom table in a sealed white envelope. She went to bed in the guest room, which she had moved into 6 weeks earlier, citing poor sleep from my schedule, and I sat in my study until nearly 1 a.m, going through the final details of what Thursday would look like. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was ready. I reached into the contingency folder one final time and removed a single document I had prepared personally, without the help of counsel, without the involvement of anyone else. It was written in my handwriting on company letterhead. It was sealed in an envelope with no name on the outside. I had driven to the office at 11:30 that night and placed it myself at the exact center of the boardroom table. Then I drove home, made a cup of tea, and went to sleep. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold and completely ordinary. She came downstairs dressed for the office, which surprised me for exactly 1 second before I remembered that she still believed she had a role there. She had her badge, she had her access card, she had the particular confidence of someone who had not yet received information that would reorganize everything she thought she understood about her position. She left before me. I arrived 20 minutes later in a car I had borrowed from a colleague specifically so she would not see my vehicle in the lot and have any extra seconds to prepare. I walked through the lobby, took the elevator to the executive floor, and sat down in my chair at the head of the boardroom table precisely 4 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. The envelope was exactly where I had left it. She walked in at 9:02, and she was not alone. Her father was with her. He had apparently called her that morning, which told me his own network inside the company had given him some advance signal that something was happening, though clearly not enough of a signal for either of them to understand what they were walking into. They came through the boardroom door together, and they stopped. They stopped completely. They stopped the way people stop when the physical reality of a room does not match the version of it they have been carrying in their heads. Because there was the operations manager, the man from 2 floors below, seated at the far end of the table with our head of compliance and 2 external legal representatives beside him. There were 6 board members arranged along the sides. There was my private general counsel standing near the window. And there, at the head of the table, in the chair that had always been mine, was me, looking directly at them, saying nothing. The color left both their faces in a way that I will not pretend I did not notice. Her father, who had spent 4 years acting as though his presence in this organization was a gift he had bestowed upon me, gripped the back of a chair and said nothing. The operations manager, the ambitious one, looked at the table in front of him. He did not look up when she entered. That detail told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation had already gone before she arrived. I invited them both to sit down. My voice was level. I was not performing calm. I was calm. I gestured toward the envelope at the center of the table and told her it was addressed to her. She crossed the room, and I noticed her hands were not steady when she picked it up. She opened it. She read what was inside. I will not reproduce every word of that letter here because some of it is deeply private and some of it is subject to the legal proceedings that followed, but I will tell you what it contained in its essential form. It contained a precise, documented summary of the 9 weeks of evidence I had gathered. It contained the compliance case that had been reopened. It contained the board's formal resolution, passed at 7 that morning via electronic vote, removing her father from the advisory board with immediate effect, and accepting the operations manager's suspension, pending the outcome of the compliance review. It contained a single paragraph at the end, written in my own hand, that was not legal language at all. It said that I had loved her without reservation for 11 years, and that the version of events she had chosen to build inside the house I had built for both of us was something I had not deserved, and that I was releasing both of us from something that had stopped being real long before I had been willing to see it. She did not cry in the boardroom. I had not expected her to. She is not someone who shows that particular kind of vulnerability in front of an audience. What she did was set the letter down on the table with both hands, look at me for a long moment with an expression I had never seen on her face before, and then quietly ask what happened to her access credentials. I told her they had been suspended as of 7 that morning, pending a standard review of her role definition, which was technically accurate and also the most merciful framing I could offer for what was, in reality, a complete restructuring of the executive layer she had inhabited. Her father tried to speak. My general counsel put a hand up in his direction. The conversation was not for him. It had never been for him. The meeting concluded in 41 minutes. The operations manager was escorted from the building by our head of security, a quiet and professional departure that I had specifically requested be handled without drama. Her father left without speaking to me. He stood outside the elevator for a moment as though he might turn around and say something, and then the doors opened and he stepped in and was gone. She and I were the last two people in that room. She stood near the window where my counsel had been standing, and she looked out over the city, and I sat at the head of the table watching her. She finally said quietly that she had not thought I would actually do it. I told her I had told her the truth about who I was every single day of our marriage. She had simply made a different assumption about what I would tolerate. She did not respond to that. After a while, she picked up her bag and walked out, and the sound of her heels in the corridor faded and then stopped, and the boardroom was completely silent. The divorce proceedings began 12 days later. The contingency folder had a second section I had not needed to describe to anyone, because it covered every structural protection I had built into the equity architecture of the company across the previous 3 years, on the advice of counsel following the first moment I had begun to feel that something was wrong. The settlement was concluded in 4 months. The company remained intact. The Hartwell contract was signed 6 weeks after the board transition. I hired a new director of communications who had no personal connection to anyone in my life and who asked excellent questions on her first day. The operations manager resigned his position as part of the compliance resolution. Her father issued a formal written apology to the board that I accepted on behalf of the organization and then filed away in a drawer I do not intend to open again. I still have the contingency folder. It sits behind those same books on the same shelf. I have thought about whether I should remove it, whether keeping it there is some kind of unresolved thing, some relic I am holding onto for the wrong reasons. But I do not think that is what it is. I think it is a reminder of something I want to stay true about how I move through the world, which is that the people who mistake steadiness for passivity, who see someone refuse to perform their anger and conclude that the anger is not there, who wheel a designer suitcase out a door believing they already know the ending, those people are working from a version of you they invented. And the most clarifying moment of your life is the one where you stop performing for that invented version and simply take your seat at the head of the table and let the room tell the truth on your behalf. I said noted. I meant every syllable.